When rescue workers finally saw her, they froze. A 17-year-old girl was walking out of the Amazon rainforest alone, on foot, her dress torn to rags. One sandal was missing. Cuts and insect bites covered her arms. 11 days earlier, she had fallen nearly 2 miles from the sky, with no parachute, and lived. Most people would call that the whole story. It isn't, because her real fight hadn't happened in the air. It happened after she hit the ground. Christmas Eve, 1971. Across the world, airports were full of people trying to get home for the holidays. Suitcases stuffed with presents. Children asleep on their parents' shoulders. At Lima Airport in Peru, one of those travelers was a 17-year-old girl who thought she was about to have an ordinary family Christmas. She had no idea she was about to become one of the most studied survival cases in aviation history. Her name was Juliane. Her parents were zoologists who had spent years living and working inside the Amazon. So while other teenagers were learning to drive or worrying about school, Juliane was learning to identify birds by call, spot which plants were edible, and read a jungle the way most people read a street map. She didn't know it yet, but that childhood was about to become the only thing standing between her and the rainforest. She and her mother, Maria, were flying to meet her father at their research station near Pucallpa. The flight was Lanza 508, a routine, sold-out holiday flight from Lima. Presents in the overhead bins, families talking about Christmas dinner. Nothing about the cabin suggested this flight would end up in history books. The plane climbed into the afternoon sky, and for a while, everything was calm. Then the sky ahead started to change. Thunderclouds were building along the route, the kind that form fast during Peru's rainy season and don't warn you before they turn violent. Lightning flickered somewhere in the distance. The first jolt of turbulence made a few passengers glance up from their conversations. Nobody yet understood what they'd flown into. Within minutes, it got worse. Trays rattled. Overhead bins shook loose. The plane dropped, then lurched upward again. Rain hammered the windows so hard it sounded like static. Each flash of lightning lit the cabin white for a second, before plunging it back into shadow. Maria tried to keep her daughter calm. Turbulence was normal. She said nothing to worry about. Juliane, who had flown before and trusted the pilots, believed her. That belief lasted until the next jolt threw people against their seatbelts hard enough to draw gasps down the whole cabin. Then came the flash that changed everything. To this day, investigators debate exactly what happened in that instant. Most believe the aircraft was struck by lightning. What's certain is what came next. The plane began breaking apart mid-air, thousands of feet above unbroken jungle. Screaming filled the cabin. Oxygen masks dropped. Loose baggage flew past Juliane's head. In seconds, Flight 508 stopped being a single airplane. Juliane barely had time to register what was happening. Metal tore with a sound she'd never forget. Wind roared through what was left of the cabin. One moment her mother was beside her. The next, the entire row of seats with Juliane still strapped into hers had ripped free from the rest of the plane. There was nothing beneath her but sky. Picture opening your eyes to nothing but clouds. No plane, no ground, no way to stop what's happening to you. Still buckled to her seat, Juliane spun through open air as the wreckage of the row tumbled toward the jungle 2 miles below. Debris scattered around her, swallowed instantly by the storm. The roar of wind drowned out everything else, including, at some point, her own consciousness. What kept her alive during that fall is still debated by scientists decades later. Being belted into her seat may have spread the force of landing across her body instead of concentrating it. The dense forest canopy may have slowed her, snapping branches on the way down like a natural airbag. Updrafts inside the storm may have softened her descent even further. None of it was a guarantee. Combined, it was just barely enough. Then nothing. Nobody knows exactly how long she was unconscious. When Juliane opened her eyes, sunlight was filtering down through the canopy, and the jungle was already loud with birdsong and insects. For a few seconds, she didn't understand where she was. Her head pounded, her vision blurred. Then she remembered the plane. She forced herself to sit up and take stock. Branches were snapped all around her. Fragments of wreckage lay scattered across the ground. Her glasses were gone. So was one sandal. Her collarbone throbbed, later confirmed as fractured, and deep cuts ran along both arms. She was alive. She had no idea yet if anyone else was. "Mom?" Nothing answered but birdsong. She called again. Still nothing. Only insects. only the endless static of the rainforest. For the first time, it hit her. She might be entirely alone in one of the largest, least forgiving forests on the planet. Surviving the fall had been the easy part. Juliane made herself breathe slowly. Panic, she knew, could kill her faster than any animal in that forest. Her shoulders screamed with every movement. Her vision, without glasses, was a blur of green, and underneath the pain, one question wouldn't leave her. Was her mother out there somewhere, hurt, waiting to be found? She searched what she could of the crash site. All she found was more wreckage, more silence, and no sign of anyone else. The Amazon swallows people. She knew that better than most 17-year-olds ever could. Now she had to figure out how not to become one of them. One memory saved her before anything else did. Her father had told her, years earlier, that if you're ever lost near water, follow it downstream. Streams lead to rivers, and rivers lead to people. It had been an offhand piece of advice at the time. Now it was the only plan she had. She stopped, closed her eyes, and listened past the insects for the sound of moving water. Nothing. She kept walking, stopping every few steps to listen again. Then faint, but real, a trickle. She pushed through the undergrowth until she reached it, a narrow stream threading between rocks and fallen leaves. Her parents' rule came back to her instantly. Once you find water, don't leave it. She stepped in and started walking with the current. She had no way of knowing it would take 11 days to pay off. Darkness came fast under the canopy long before the actual sunset. With no fire, no shelter, and nothing to eat, she lay down on the wet ground that first night and simply waited it out, flinching at every snapped branch in the dark. By day 2, hunger had become impossible to ignore. But another lesson stopped her from grabbing at fruit. Some jungle plants that looked perfectly safe could kill within hours. Without certainty, eating was a bigger risk than starving a little longer, so she didn't eat. Insects covered her skin constantly. Every scratch stayed damp in the humidity, which meant every scratch was a potential infection. She brushed the bugs away out of habit more than hope. They always came back. And then a colder thought arrived. What if rescuers were already out searching and simply looking in the wrong place? From above, the Amazon's canopy looks like an unbroken green ceiling. A person underneath it is invisible. Search planes could pass within a mile of her and never know it. She could be almost found and still never be found at all. She kept walking anyway. The stream widened as she went, which made the walking marginally easier, right up until she'd stumble on smooth rock or slip and reopen a half-healed cut. Each time, she got back up, not because it felt possible, but because stopping felt like the one guaranteed way to lose. Some nights, she heard something big moving through the brush nearby. She never saw what it was. Most Amazon wildlife avoids humans on instinct. Her real enemies weren't teeth or claws. They were exhaustion, dehydration, and infection. Still, not knowing what was out there in the dark was its own kind of fear. Days blurred together. No watch, no landmarks. Nothing to mark one sunrise from the next, except that each one meant she'd made it through another night. Her body kept sending her the bill. The collarbone injury throbbed constantly. One bare foot, without a sandal, took the full punishment of roots and stones with every step. And still, for reasons she couldn't fully explain even to herself later, she never stopped moving. Then, finally, a sign. An area where the underbrush had clearly been cleared by human hands. Not nature, not a village, not rescuers, but proof that people had been here before, which meant they might come again. The only question left was whether she'd survive long enough to meet them. By day 10, Juliane barely recognized her own body. Mud-caked legs, a shredded yellow dress, a shoulder that hadn't stopped aching in over a week. She kept moving anyway, trusting the same logic that had gotten her this far. As long as the water kept flowing, so would she. Then something new appeared on the riverbank. Not wreckage, not wildlife. A small wooden boat. She touched it, just to be sure it was real. It was. A boat meant people. Nearby, she found a logging shelter empty, but clearly in use. Tools were scattered, as if someone had just stepped away. She made a decision that likely saved her life. She waited. While she waited, she discovered something worse than she expected. An arm wound had become infested with maggots. Most people would panic at the sight, But Juliane remembered something her father once mentioned almost in passing, that maggots, in the right conditions, eat dead tissue without touching what's still healthy. She found a can of fuel at the camp, poured a small amount onto the wound, and the maggots came out almost immediately. It hurt more than almost anything else in the past 10 days combined. It also very likely kept the infection from becoming fatal. As the light started to fade again, she waited, watching the river for any sign of movement. Hours passed before she finally heard voices. A group of local loggers returned by boat and found a teenage girl sitting alone by their shelter, her injuries visible from a distance. For a moment, none of them said anything, they simply stared. She told them, quietly, that she'd survived the plane crash. Nobody on board Flight 508 was supposed to have survived, and yet here she was. The men gave her food and water carefully, in small amounts after that many days with almost nothing. Too much too fast could have made things worse. They cleaned what wounds they could and let her rest, before taking her by boat to the nearest village the next morning, where she could finally get real medical care. 11 days after the crash, Juliane was safe. News spread fast across Peru. Recovery teams went back to the wreckage and found the other victims. Her mother, Maria, had survived the initial fall, but badly injured and unable to move through the jungle, did not survive long enough to be found. Juliane learned this only after her own rescue, and the grief of it never fully separated itself from the fact of her own survival. She had walked out of the rainforest alive. She had also lost her mother inside it. Both were true at once, for the rest of her life. Doctors who examined her afterward were startled by how limited the damage actually was, given the fall and the 11 days that followed. A broken collarbone, deep lacerations, heavy bruising, severe exhaustion serious, but nowhere near what should have been possible. Exactly why she lived is still debated. The seat may have absorbed some of the impact. The canopy may have slowed her fall. Storm updrafts may have helped too. Nobody can say for certain which factor mattered most, or whether it took all of them together. What is certain is what she did afterward. Juliane could have spent her life avoiding the rainforest that nearly killed her, and did kill her mother. Instead, she went back not once, but as a career. She became a biologist, following her parents into the same field of work, in the same region that had tested her at 17. Years later, she returned to the crash site itself. It brought the memories back, all of them, but it also clarified something for her. Surviving wasn't really about being strong. It was about staying calm enough to think. It was about one correct decision after another, made without any guarantee they'd matter. Follow the water, conserve strength, keep going. None of those decisions felt heroic while she was making them. Together, they were the entire difference between living and not. More than 50 years later, people still tell this story not because Juliane beat the jungle in some dramatic final confrontation, but because she proved something quieter and more useful, that a clear head, under the worst possible pressure, can outlast almost anything. On Christmas Eve, 1971, 91 people boarded Lanza Flight 508. Only one walked out of the jungle alive. Her name was Juliane, and this remains one of the only true accounts of a lightning storm plane crash survived firsthand. If this story stayed with you, there are more true survival stories, just as hard to believe, because sometimes reality really does outdo fiction.